Mukherjee, Uprashtrapati Hamid Ansari,
We begin formally just a few announcements. To say that NMML has, in association with CDD Scholars, got a conference tomorrow and day after, Frontier and the Northeast. It's being done in association with our own senior fellow, Professor Sajal Lag, and with Dr. Surya Sikha Pachak from Assam University, Silchar, and Professor Gunal Sedalov from Uppsala University, Sweden. This conference is part of our efforts to expand our engagement with scholarship from and on Northeast India, and all of you are of course invited. I also want to emphasize many of the people speaking in the conference are young and upcoming scholars from the region itself. On Monday, that's on the 4th of February at 3 o'clock, Zulu Roy, in a series of lectures in Hindi, is speaking on Itihas, Samaj aur Paryavar. On the 5th of February, the weekly seminar, Ms. Julia Stevens of Harvard University, a doctoral student, speaking on Shamsun Nisa's case, domesticity, economy and colonial secularization. The India and Wider World lecture series, which has had a very positive response since it began in December, continues, and on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, Professor Rajan Harshe speaks on revisiting Indo-African ties in the 21st century. Harshe is the leading scholar presently teaching at the South Asian University. And Thursday, we have a talk by another doctoral student on Out of the Ballot Box, the role of political practices in Indian nationhood, on the 7th of February, 3 p.m. And on Friday next week, on the 8th, Dr. Saman Mukherjee, Presidency University, the newly established Presidency University, which of course descends from the very old Presidency College and the even older Hindu College, Kolkata. This is a very interesting title. It's within quotes, the bones are probably no value, unquote, the evaluation of Buddhist relics in colonial South Asia. As you know, since the last year, we've been having a series of public lectures in which leading scholars in a particular field reflect on theme in the recent work. And it's a great privilege to have Professor Mushirul Hasan here today. He is, of course, a historian of great distinction who needs no introduction. He also has a very old association with the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, both as a user of the library from his student days, but also as one of the very distinguished people who's held our fellowship in the past. I also, on a personal note, want to welcome him back. He also spoke I think a couple of years ago in our seminar on Delhi, but I especially want to extend a particularly warm welcome, because we live in times when academic knowledge, the pursuit of scholarship is not only an enchanting and enthralling activity, but it brings with it various perils. And I'm sure you would all agree with me that his own record in public life, in scholarship, has shown us how a person can continue to be true to scholarship and stand up to these perils. So I don't want to embarrass him further. His lecture topic, as you know, is The Road to Freedom, Prison and Prisoners in Barrage. Professor Mushirul.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and to be speaking to all of you with Professor Mahesh Rangarajan in the chair, who has in a sense restored the pristine glory of this institution and has managed to turn things around and converted this into a vibrant intellectual center for research as well as debate. Thank you very much indeed for your very kind words. I'm very diffident to speak on this subject largely because this is a completely new area that I have chosen for my future book, and it is completely different from anything that I have written about. As some of you would have noticed, that I have just finished a book on Gandhi, and this essay is really a far cry from the concerns that I have articulated or examined in the Gandhi book. But the purpose of presenting it before you is simply to offer an outline of what I propose to do. So this is not as it were, the final statement, so to speak. but just referring to some of the important historical aspects that need maybe rethinking or revisiting in the light of the researchers. And I can see at least one person, Rani Shankar Das, in this audience who has worked on this theme in several different ways, and I have found her work, as indeed the books that she has edited, to be extremely useful. Well, this has a lot of Urdu verses, which some of which I would be able to translate, but with the rest, I'm afraid I won't have the time to do so. But I start with a verse by Faiz Ahmed Faiz, which is a very, very well-known verse. Maqam Faiz koi raah mein jacha hi nahi, jo kuए yaar se nikle to suedar chale. The 19th century Urdu poet Mirza Ghalib wrote, "Prisoner of thy trespasses, why would I escape fetters? A captive of sorrow, why would I fear the dungeon? If the preacher has locked me, so be it. Shall we ever renounce these days of love's poised passion?" In Urdu poetry, zinda, prison or qaid khana has multiple meanings and interpretations. In Ghalib's era, stories of Kala Pani had reached far and wide. The poet had heard of and lamented the death of Fazl-e Haq Khairabadi, and like other contemporary poets and writers, used qaid khana to depict cruelty in dungeon and as a symbol of subjugation. Consequently, while the calm waters of jail life had few disturbances or ripples, the word qaidi or prisoner conjured up the image of victimhood, asir zinda. His fate was sealed, destined as he was to suffer at the hands of the beloved and to die at the gallows. Such imageries, which had a pronounced romantic touch, stirred popular emotions. Poets popularized them in their poems. Ram Prasad Bismil, a freedom fighter, immortalized the lines of a poet from Bihar, "Sarfaroshi ki tamanware dil mein hai, dekhna hai zor kitna, baazue qatil mein hai." The Indian folklore had scores of representation of a young couple being separated because the man had to wage war against the enemy, quote unquote. Prison or death meant salvation for the motherland. As a consequence, Bhagat Singh and Batu Keshwar Datta, who were jailed from April 1929 to March 31, and who believed in revolution as the inalienable rights of mankind, welcomed any suffering to which they were to be condemned. In their statement before the session court, they said, "To the altar of the revolution we have brought our youth as incense, for no sacrifice is too great for so magnificent a cause." People died in jail. When that happened, they were buried or cremated in jail or brought to their families for the last rituals. Deaths in jail removed the veil from the mysterious land and lent urgency to the fate of its unfortunate inmates. The classic and immortal examples of Terence McSweeney and Jatin Das, wrote Subhash Chandra Bose from Calcutta's Presidency Jail, are floating before my mind's eye at the moment. A system has no heart that could be moved, unquote. In fact, freedom, Swaraj or Azadi became a spiritual condition, and its attainment the noblest and loftiest of all goals. Jail-going became the most sublime of tasks. At the height of the non-cooperation campaign, all 55 members of the United Provinces Provincial Congress Committee were imprisoned. Hussain Ahmad Madani, famously known as Asir-e Malta, became the pillar of the Deoband Seminary and a leading figure in nationalist politics. Regardless of their proclivities, people recalled others as self-sacrificing individuals, took interest in their life stories, and narrated them with a sense of pride. Their passion heightened while recounting Bhagat Singh's execution or relating the story of Lajpat Rai, who stood by the roadside in front of the demonstration against the Simon Commission. If one mediates on the force of character and the variety of intellectual interests which lived in these and other people, we realize how much Indian nationalism owed to them. I have therefore decided in this book that I am in the process of writing on a sample of men to illustrate their patriotic ardor and examine their claim to illuminate and beautify the world with their deeds. Roads to Freedom, that's the tentative title of the book, is rooted in the histories of prisons in South Asia, primarily in a milieu of nationalism. My plan is to produce a triangular narrative because very few historians have examined the pattern and genesis of the role of the colonial authorities, the prisoners, and their protagonists. Why did, I ask, some people traverse the jail road when alternative ways of achieving personal glory and advancement existed? What propped up their fraternal attachment? And why did they do things in which they had taken a lifelong pleasure? Why be patriotic in the very first place? Why, to make a pointed reference, did C.R. Das give up his princely standard of living and grow a beard in jail? Was this the agony of servitude? Did he and others give away their individual freedom for a common national freedom? Or did they hanker after public esteem and approval? Why did the Ali brothers, the foremost pan-Islamicists, wear half-moons in their grey cap and Khuddam-e-Kaaba badge compared with their European style of dress in previous years? What did they aspire to achieve? Was their flowing gown an affirmation of dissent? Why did Gandhi decide in the prison as the site of his fast? What, if any, was the chief motive behind jail going? In this, and this is where I think the historian comes in this triangular narrative, the Viceroy and his subordinates refused to recognize the bravest and most daring fighters. When pushed to a tight corner, they did no more than to debate prison reforms or compile annual reports. This is the drama of the colonizer. In the end, the bureaucratic rigor reveals very little, leaving the prisoners and their protagonists high and dry. It was one thing to raise the whirlwind, but quite different thing to ride the storm. Harry Haig, UP's Lieutenant Governor, whose papers are here, the microphone is here, had predicted in a period of relative political tranquil, and I quote, "One might say that the ocean lies at the moment calm and with hardly a ripple, but the same ocean would present a very different appearance under the influence of a strong gale," unquote. This strong gale came from Gandhi's Quit India resolution. As Albert Memmi's points out in another context, the colonial situation by its own internal inevitability brings on revolt. For the colonial condition cannot be adjusted to. Like an iron pillar, it can only be broken. And it is in this context, in this connection, that I examine the perspectives provided by the press, the political organizations, the publicists, and the Congress ministries between 1937 and 39, which faced the volume of public criticism for not fulfilling their promises as regards prisoners. Central, Mr. Chairman, to both the official and non-official discourses was the definition of a political prisoner. The official discourse was simple enough. Persons involved in anti-government activities were neither freedom fighters nor political prisoners. They were simply seditionists and mutineers. Indeed, the political prisoner was like a red rag to the bull. So was the word political. To give an instance, somebody in Bihar's Hazaribagh jail asked for a polished textbook of economics entitled Textbook of Political Economy. The authorities refused to pass it because of the word political. But they saw no objection in approving ABC of communism and theory of the leisure class. We then have to contend with the conflicting views on what was political in the essence. What's the motive of a mob that gets inflamed to the extent of killing Europeans? Is it political or something else? There is no denying offences of a political character to which the Extradition Act of 1870 itself made mention of, and that Winston Churchill, then Home Secretary, introduced a rule in order, as he said, to mitigate the more degrading conditions of prison treatment for offenders whose crime did not imply moral turpitude. In India, the authorities were poorly equipped to face the consequence of what was, in the background of crime and punishment, a political or a straightforward criminal act. Historical researchers have, and anthropological researchers have established that the colonial government classified groups into castes and religions to suit its assumptions about Indian society. What is probably less known is that it even divided prisoners as Hindu, Muslim, Christian, a division that is otherwise hard to justify or sustain. Thus, a report from the Bombay Presidency pointed to a small increase in the proportion of Christian and Hindu prisoners and a diminution in the relative proportion of Muslim prisoners in 1876 as compared with 1875. The report went on to explain why this was so. The domain, ladies and gentlemen, in which I place prisoners is a fluid one, formed at the intersection of local, regional, pan-Islamic, pan-Indian, and explicitly, implicitly colonial, and used local and regional in terms of geographical location. If a prisoner had to give up home, he did more than change his residence. He had to cut himself from the outside world, had to learn to adjust to new people, had in short to create a totally new life within the barracks. It is not the loss of a profession, of status, that alone and by itself was painful, but rather another way of living which required readjustment. As Felix Edmundowicz, the Polish revolutionary and disciple and comrade in arms of Lenin, stated, and I quote, it's a nice quote, "I am calm enough, yet the strange tranquility is utterly at variance with these wars and with the things from which they have separated me. The point is that everyday life has been replaced by vegetative existence, activity by introspection." And these are the kinds of sentiments that Emin Roy expresses in very sort of in eloquent ways. With these points in mind, I try to, and this is writing this section was a very interesting experience. I try to capture the tumults in the lives of those who lived in a world that had looked down on them. Besides, I record their voices of lament, which I try to interpret with the aid of poets like Faiz Ahmad Faiz, who had written, "Darkness is gushing forward, as though the veins of night are spewing blood. The pulse of life is beating, as if intoxication of both worlds were snapping." I do so to indicate how, with the aid of a notebook, pen and ink, some prisoners, like the gentleman right behind me, reflected on life and how their thoughts, like leaves chased by the winds, flew in all directions. Although no hard and sharp lines can be drawn, prison in fact became a site where personal and political identities were continuously shaped and restructured. It continuously shaped the feelings of resentment towards British rule and the pride and honor of working towards a free India. Prison is a place where each day is like a year whose days are long, wrote Oscar Wilde. To be here, to be there again and again was neither a trivial nor an easy matter, nor was any kind of confinement exactly a bed of roses. In a voiceless world, it was difficult, as Nehru found, to make the mental adjustment to the petty tyrannies of jail life, or bear the inconveniences and look to the curse of colonialism. To be sick in jail was like being in hell. One led a dog's life. It is a thoroughly impersonal system that works mercilessly, reducing human beings to animals kept behind bolted bars, wrote M.N. Roy. In Rai Bareli's district jail, Muzaffar Ahmad fell seriously ill in September 1925 and had to be transferred to the Almora district jail. Solitude and inaction ate deeply into Mridula Sarabhai's spirit as she eagerly awaited for letters from home, which were often delayed because Gujarati letters took longer in censoring. Women like her, Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay and Aruna Asif Ali, lived in dark, dingy places with damp air, musty, small and bats hanging from the ceilings. There were lighter moments. Excited voices, laughter and mock jeers resounded across the barracks. The lives of women, which have been recently constructed in scores of feminist studies and which has changed our understanding of where they stood in prison life, washed dishes after sunset and recreated the day's events with a supplement of gossip and anecdotes. Every fortnight, the elite families of prisoners came in covered palanquins or draped carriages bringing the choicest delicacies. These parcels of food would be the occasion for feasts in the barrack, which would go on till late in the evenings to the accompaniment of much wit and banter, recitations of Urdu poetry or political disputations. In the Andamans, poets wrote poetry on the floor and brick wall and used brick powder for writing. What they wrote, they shared with each other. During the Second World War, Sifte Hasan visited Sajjad Zahir, then in the Lucknow jail, and along with gifts of fruits and cigarettes, he gave him a copy of Poems of Freedom. The anthology contained poems on subjects up to the Second World War. It contained address to the Sons of the East India Company by Josh Mali Abadi, as well as Sardar Jafri's poems, Dance, O Spirit of Freedom, for all life the universe is dancing, the universe is whirling on the axis of time. Caste prejudices existed, so did the community divide. a great many people read religious books and texts, listened to lectures and discussed theology. Gandhi and Muhammad Ali did that. In the Hazaribagh jail, Swami Sahajanand lectured on the Gita, whereas Rajan Babu read the principal Upanishad for the first time in his life. This did not, however, accelerate exclusivist tendencies. Individuals transcended religious and caste allegiances to forged lifelong friendships. Rajendra Prasad, who had travelled widely and had opportunities of meeting many people from all walks of life, came to know people intimately in the Hazaribagh jail and cherished the memory of those contacts. Gandhi had written, "We should turn our prisons into happy places." Motilal Nehru did just that. He talked and laughed and recited Hafiz Shirazi's Persian poetry in the Lucknow Central Jail. He and 20 other persons played Gulli Danda. Their co-prisoner Ganesh Shankar Vidyarthi was a witness to this until his release on the 22nd of May 1922. Hussain Zahir, a scientist, and C.D. Gupta, who became UP's Chief Minister, played Rummy. When they stood up from under the blanket of Gupta, restlessly came out a joker, a card, and fell on the ground laughing. Sayyid Mahmood and Vallabhbhai Patel competed for honours in Takli spinning, and it had come to this, that the former was seen one night twiddling his fingers even in his sleep as if he was working a Takli. Scholars talk of the interactional spaces that are embodied in a certain kind of prison environment balanced by a culture of lenience, the following of rules, the ordering of the physical space, a set of institutional beliefs around what a prison should be like, and a set of intense interpersonal dynamic between and among the controller and the controlled. It is that this is what led prisoners to play badminton and gulli danda, or to organize feasts on, for example, Eid and Basant Panchami. On Nehru's birthday, the 14th November, according to the Georgian calendar, he produced some presents and arranged with Abdul Majid Khwaja, his fellow student at Cambridge once, to send a huge feast. In the intervening period, Patel, Mahmood and Ranjit debated the desirability of masala in food. Asif Ali had better things to do. He spent sleepless nights thinking of Aruna. She had served more than 4 terms in prison, nearly 4 out of the 15 years of their married life. Qazi Jalil Abbasi, president of the Students' Federation, played chess with the prison guards, read Good Earth by Perlis Buck, the American novelist, and Mother by Gorky. In the adjoining barrack was Sardar Chandar Singh Warwali, who had refused to fire at Pathans in Peshawar and was now undergoing life term in jail. Daya Prasad, Jaydev Kapoor and Shiv Verma, all serving life term in their barracks, Bhagat Singh's companions, and were brought back to Hindustan from Kalapani after a protracted hunger strike. They roared from their barracks to welcome Sardar Jafri. That was his first night in jail, cool and pleasant, like many nights of Lucknow's early winter. It was not always honey and sugar. Heated arguments broke out not once but on several occasions. They were between friends and fellow travelers. On the outcome of the Quit India movement, for example, members of the Congress Working Committee were divided in their views on street demonstrations and violence. Nehru felt then, as he had felt during the non-cooperation movement, that the spontaneous, unorganized demonstrations and outbursts on the part of the people indicated the intensity of their feelings. The arrest of their leaders and their frequent firings that followed caught them unaware, and their immediate reaction to it, however unthinking and misdirected it was, showed their love for freedom and their hatred of foreign domination. At the same time, it is fair to point out that ideological differences, which I have discussed at great length, but which I have only summarized in the paragraph here, narrowed in jail. Almost everybody knew each other in the barrack and needed to support each other. They laughed to one another, decided together, often disagreeing and giving in, each indulgent to the other on what to do and what not to do. The spirit of togetherness drew them in its embrace. But again, it was not always honey and sugar. Savarkar spews venom against the Muslims and gives an inkling of Hindu-Muslim estrangement in the Andamans and Ratnagiri. Maharaj, who was also in the Andamans with his Savarkar brothers, differed with the methods of some fellow revolutionaries. Sarojini Naidu reported a different kind of a nerve-shattering scene between Gandhi and Rajaji in Pune jail. According to her, the little man, that is how he described Gandhi, shouted in uncontrollable rage with eyes flashing fury, "Don't dare to shatter the fundamentals of my faith." But she also had interesting stories to tell, such as the story of her friend who seemed to have possessed powers so that she could clearly see things happening at another place as in the future. Listening to some of these stories, Gandhi said, "If God was to offer me the power of extrasensory perception, I do not think I would accept it. If there is happiness in store for me tomorrow, why lessen the joy of it by knowing about it beforehand? And if there is unhappiness coming, why spoil today's sleep in anticipation of what is coming tomorrow?" I said that I was going to pick on some individuals to illustrate some of the points that I was trying to make. And there's, of course, there's a discussion on Gandhi, Nehru, and M.N. Roy, and Subhash Chandra Bose, and so on. But let me introduce to you a person who is obviously not very well known, and certainly not so well known to this audience. A poet, a very fine poet, I mean, a top-ranking poet, with a very interesting career. I'll just basically introduce the man. He is Hasan Mohani, very, as I said, leading poet, nationalist who lived till 1955, 56, and played an extremely important role, which is sadly, marginalized by the grand narratives of Indian nationalism, about which I will briefly speak toward the end. A Calcutta newspaper talked of a peculiar gentleman. This is a section, so there is a paragraph which may not be relevant to Hazrat, but nonetheless, the Calcutta newspaper talked of a peculiar gentlemanliness, solemnity and glory during Gandhi's trial. And an ailing M.N. Roy had spoken from the deck in his own defense. He admitted that he had preached the doctrine of violence, but that the government was an enormous tyranny. He quoted Hume and Bentham in support of his contention, though Justice Thorne, to whom he made the plea, dismissed their writings as irrelevant. Hazrat, the man who wanted an Indian Republic to be called the United States of India, was arrested and tried by 5 jurors. All the 5 men unanimously confirmed the accused to be innocent of the charges. In spite of their verdict, Hazrat was punished. Why then was the jury called in? If it was, why did the judge disregard their decision? A गालिब had written, लिखते रहे जुनू की हिकायात खूचका, हर चंद इसमें हाथ हमारे कलम हुए. हसरत रूहानी wrote on similar lines. है मश्क फर्ज जारी, चक्की की मशक्कत भी एक तरफा तमाशा है, हसरत की तबीयत भी. हसरत continued, Hasan continued, there's some pages called this, continued writing, Hasan continues writing poetry along with the labor of grinding wheat. With what an odd nature is Hasan blessed. This faith gave him the strength to carry on in spite of everything. All his life he worked with redoubled energy to set up a Swadeshi store in Aligarh, launched Urdu-e-Mualla, an extraordinary initiative in those early days of Urdu journalism, and praised the contribution of Tilak. Given his political radicalism that ran contrary to the lessons taught by the founder of the MA College, his was a hellishly hard job. Inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution and appreciating the dangerous times in which Indians were living under colonial rule, he joined the Communist Party of India. One special feature of the demonstrations against the Simon Commission was the poster with the slogan, "Long live revolution." Some said that Hasrat was the first to give this slogan in the case brought against him for moving the resolution on complete independence. Once he read out his statement to Muzaffar Ahmad, one of the founders of the communist movement. Stories of courage and sacrifices are woven around this man, who had to undergo rigorous imprisonment with meager clothes, a skirt, knickers, a cap, a piece of jute cloth, and a rough and ready blanket for his bed. A dogged fighter, he possessed terrific willpower in order not to retreat, to hold out, and not to let his own principles down. His passion for Azadi remained undiminished, though his biographer thinks that he lacked foresight and statesmanship, and for this reason was prone to switching his political allegiances. He defied Gandhi at the Ahmedabad Congress in December 1921, insisting that he should fight for complete independence. Gandhi, of course, as we all know, disagreed and had to hustle everybody to get his own resolution adopted. Hasrat also crossed swords with the Ali brothers. He stood for the Republic of Hijaz and wanted the Central Khilafat Committee not to support the conservative Ibn Saud. He defied the authors of the Nehru Committee report in 1928 when they recommended dominion status instead of complete independence for India's future constitution. He could not restrain his anger. Hasrat and his wife Nishatul Nisa were disciples of Maulana Abdul Bari, the alim at Lucknow's Farangi Mahal, and spent from 1901 to 1937 long years together. She was his devoted companion for better and for worse through many years of vicissitudes and successes, sorrows and aspirations, clouds and shines. When Hasrat was arrested in 1908, she urged him to be firm and resolute. Some years ago, it was quite on the cards that Hasrat would be arrested yet again. When this happened in April 1916, Nishatul Nisa rallied round her husband. She prayed for his long life. If he has been arrested in connection with the freedom struggle, she added, then he should also be treated like others who have been arrested. But God only knows his plans. In another letter, she talked of her husband's steely resolve and robust patience. Hasrat had chink in his armor. He thought he was doing an important job, and in time it will yield results. He worked grimly, straining every nerve in order to hold out and to overcome the chronic family problems of poverty and so on. He exhibited no sign of weakness, turning down Abdul Bari's suggestion of accepting the order regarding house arrest and citing the Quran in support of his stand. Hazrat composed the best part of his poetry in jail. Whatever fate may be in store for the Urdu language, and that fate is very uncertain, those verses which relate to any current situation will endure as a model of fine poetry, that is, if Urdu survives in this country, the chances of which are very remote. As a solitary individual, he was not able to express himself by giving examples of his most important concern or to counsel others, but it is this inadequacy that his poems actualize. A poem preserves and concentrates its strength and is capable of releasing it even after a long time. Thus, my opinions are free and so are my spirit. It is useless to lock up Hasrat's body. Again, in vain you frighten me of tyrannical imprisonment. My devoted spirit would feel free there all the more. And I conclude, Mr. Chairman, with a few observations. Nehru shared the joy and freedom with those who had, to quote him, poured out their lives in this cause like water on the thirst soil. He reminded his audience in Allahabad in January 31, that is on Independence Day, of the volunteer who received lathi blows with patience, and he walked so gallantly to his cell. In this and other ways, he managed to establish then and later India's plurality. Gandhi did the same, with the same purpose. But their statements have gone unnoticed in the grand narratives on Indian nationalism. Even though peasants, workers, women and tribals have now appeared on the historian's landscape, the ruling cult of personality in the movement are still in the ancient tradition of India, the Brahman coming out of his retreat to preach to the poor, or the prince of Kapilvastu forsaking his palace to show the true path of salvation to the lowly in his new incarnation of the Buddha. This marks, by the dominant nationalist paradigm, the appropriation of the multi-layered contest between the peoples and the colonial state. This part of Delhi embraces, as we all know, the National Archives of India. It's the repository of applications filed by individuals with the government for settling their claims, loss of jobs because of their participation in the freedom struggle, loss of property for the same reason, and the destruction of family life in their absence. The Indian Council of Historical Research runs a big project on martyrs and on the Ghadar party. In addition, the Ministry of Culture observes various commemorative events. During the last couple of years, it would have spent crores when premier educational institutions have been starved of funds to remind us of the creativity of Rabindranath Tagore and Swami Vivekananda on the one hand, and the political energies displayed by Motilal Nehru, Madan Mohan Malaviya and others on the other. Sadly, however, the political establishment, the professional historian and the Darbari poets have excluded or marginalized the lesser known men and women, especially those who belong to minority groups, women, tribals and Dalits, and kept alive the discourse or the discourses of the rich and the powerful only. The prerogatives of information and position permit certain families to express their opinion as if it were objectivity. but it is solely the objectivity of the privileged classes. Hence, certain families contend that the dawn of freedom would have eluded the country without them and their sacrifices. Thus, Nayantara Sehgal talks of the meeting of national and family history, so that the entire family, grandparents, parents, uncles and aunts and all sorts present, ended its whole life and started a new one in thrall to a country whose destiny it now took to be its own. The emotional connection, she said, transformed the family's lifestyle and life's goals. Elsewhere, Nayantara mentions B.K. Nehru visiting Jawaharlal Nehru in jail in 1935 with his newlywed wife and Fori, the mother. While they were talking, the warder came in and laid a hand on the prisoner's arm to take him back to the cell. Fori couldn't bear this and began to cry. Nehru looked back and said to her, "No tears. In this family we keep a stiff upper lip," unquote. Although Nehru did not make much of his family bonds during his public career, he was more conscious of the Congress molding India's destiny. He did not, I am afraid, care much for thousands of non-Congress families from socialist, communist and liberal backgrounds who faced numerous hardships. In his partisan view, he forgot that they had also fought for an idea, that they also went to jail for long years, and that they also played a large part in restoring the liberal foundations of the modern Indian state. Which of the two opposing points is correct? Both, I believe, are true and false. Perhaps the truth lies in one or the other of those two positions. One thing is, however, certain. Studying the lives in British jails alone can give an altogether different thrust to India's story of bondage and freedom. Often, George Rude, the historian, suggests, in the context of food riots in England, the leaders who appeared for trial were not so much leaders in any commonly accepted sense of the term, as those whose momentary enthusiasm or daring marked them out for arrest by the police.
Thank you. Over the last couple of decades, there's been a lot of new work on prisons, drawing on the insights of